Blizzard finally released a statement about the shituation that led to hashtag boycott Blizzard to be trending for nearly 2 days straight. If you're out of the loop regarding this, go check out my prior video, link in the description in case you missed it. But TLDR, the gaming corporation banned a pro player and terminated the casters on the broadcast after the pro player shouted a phrase in support of the Hong Kong protests against the Chinese government. This is followed by backlash from both its own employees and the gaming community at large, which is inclusive of its own Hearthstone competitive community, with other casters stepping down and even other players in collegiate tournaments holding up protest signs. Let's dig into what Blizzard said about what happened and call out the zombie lies that are spewed throughout the statement. After one paragraph of recap and 2 paragraphs of basically saying nothing while somehow taking up 11 lines in the post, we finally get to the meat of the response. I actually can both understand and agree with Blizzard on their first point to a certain degree, but Blitzchung did use the official esports tournament broadcast as a platform to share his political views with the world, and this isn't what an esports tournament should be about. I can understand their rationale when they say that they don't care if one of their players speaks their minds through other avenues, but on the official broadcast it should be solely focused on the game and tournament. They then go on to explain that they're reducing the penalty from a 1-year ban to 6 months, as well as giving him the prize money that he had won in the tournament up until that point. I think the suspension is still a bit on the harsh side. I'd rather them ban the player for the duration of the tournament only, but regardless, I still think that this part of the statement is the only segment that's at least somewhat understandable. However, these platitudes about taking away from the broadcast and disrupting the event ring abso-fucking-lutely hollow when you consider that only days later, the team from American University held up a sign that said "Free Hong Kong, Boycott Blizzard" on the same exact Twitch channel but different broadcast, and was not punished in the same manner. In fact, they received no penalty at all, but the team decided to forfeit their next match and the rest of the entire season because of how hypocritical it was for Blizzard to punish Blitzchung and not their team, in spite of how extremely similar the events were that unfolded. Blizzard says in their statement that, quote,
"The specific views expressed by Blitzchung were not a factor in the decision we made. I want to be clear. Our relationships in China had no influence on our decision."
Have you? Sorry, I'm just allergic to bullshit. Why the difference in punishment when presented with 2 almost identical situations? The Blitzchung interview was done during the Asia-Pacific portion of the tournament, where Blizzard knows that more people from the Hong Kong and Chinese regions will be watching that broadcast, versus the American University versus Worcester Poly match was during the Collegiate Champion broadcast, where there would not be viewers from those regions and instead mostly from the Americas and EU. It's clear that in spite of both demonstrations being done on the same exact Twitch channel, there is a clear bias in punishment based on the audience that was watching said broadcast and the values of that audience. It's not appropriate to chastise people for political speech in the Western world, but in authoritarian China, it's the norm for people speaking out against that government. This is why the punishments are so radically different. It's not because of Blizzard upholding tournament rules because they're playing in the same fucking tournament. It's to appease the Chinese government because Blizzard knows that more viewers from China would be watching the Blitzchung interview in the Asia-Pacific region broadcast versus 2 random college teams in the US collegiate broadcast. Combine this with the statement that was released on the Hearthstone China Twitter account that includes the phrase, quote,
"We will always respect and defend the pride of our country,"
and it's obvious that this severe punishment for Blitzchung and the casters, which I'll get into later, is a direct correlation of Blizzard's relationship with China. As I pointed out in my last video, China has censored entities like South Park from the state-controlled internet, so Blizzard does not want to upset the totalitarian government of the country because then they'll lose out on a huge swath of potential revenue if access to that market is cut off in that fashion. They don't give a shit about the players, they care about the money. Next, consider the punishment to the casters and what was said about them here. Quote,
"Remember, their purpose is to keep the event focused on the tournament. That didn't happen here, and we're setting their suspension to 6 months as well."
Well, excuse fucking me, what exactly were the casters supposed to do here? Blitzchung's protest was a single phrase, which couldn't have been cut off by the commentators, even if they knew it was coming. They ducked underneath their desks immediately after hearing it and then switched over to a commercial. This is nearly identical to what happened on the collegiate broadcast, and you can see the casters awkwardly smiling because they knew what had just happened and are desperately trying to keep a straight face while attempting to ignore the protest after changing the scene scene from the sign to the winners of the match. One of the commentators, who was originally terminated but now suspended, released a statement on Facebook that says, quote, "Today I'm a commentator. The stage where the winner speaks is what he earned. Let him talk is my job." Yeah, that's what interviewers are supposed to fucking do. Let the player speak. I mean, Blizzard even says so in their statement.
We interview competitors who are at the top of their craft to share how they feel. We want to experience that moment with them. Hearing their excitement is a powerful way to bring us together.
You can't just have it both ways, Blizzard. If you really want to ensure that nothing crazy happens live, maybe put a fucking delay on the stream, you goddamn amateurs, to cut that shit out that you don't want aired, just like every other television broadcast has done for decades now. But back to the main point. This punishment, again, is obviously to appease a repressive Chinese regime by doling out suspensions against anyone who is even on the same fucking screen as Blitzchung when the phrase is uttered, in an extremely heavy-handed way, and is again more evidence that this action against the casters isn't about enforcing tournament rules, but rather because of their financial interests in a country that takes action against those that speak out against it or are even indirectly involved, especially when you contrast it with the lack of disciplinary action against the collegiate casters. Had that incident taken place on the Asia Pacific broadcast, would the other team had been punished because their faces were on screen during the time that the sign was being held up? You bet your ass it would have, because that's how China deals with dissent. A scorched earth policy. Considering how long it took for Blizzard to issue a statement about this, they clearly had to craft a ton of bullshit to make it seem like they're not bending the knee in the name of the almighty dollar, but instead standing by its rules and principles. Unfortunately, we could see right through that bullshit, and it's getting worse, not better, for Blizzard, with this story dominating gaming news for the better part of the past week, and with BlizzCon 2019 coming up in just a few weeks at the end of the month, you better believe that this situation is far from over. Whether or not you agree with Blitzchung's stance is irrelevant. Blizzard's actions against the player and casters are not enforcement of their tournament rules, it's placation of one of the biggest markets in the world for their own financial interests. That is something worth protesting about, regardless of what your thoughts are on the China versus Hong Kong debacle. As an aside, I've gotten a few questions about it. No, I haven't played Call of Duty Mobile, nor will I be reviewing it, because I don't use a phone to be antisocial and play games. I instead use my phone to be antisocial and text people. Plus, it's basically an app version of two 10-cent games smashed together. The original Battle Royale mode in Rings of Elysium, because the UI and design is clearly lifted from it, and Call of Duty Online, which is what you've been watching in the background, that I played for years now, so I don't feel the need to waste the space on my phone reserved for my selfies in favor of a game. Back when there was a job listing for westernizing Call of Duty Online, this isn't what I had in mind. Oh yeah, and that whole hashtag boycott Blizzard thing, especially when you consider that this is a game that was made by Tencent, a Chinese company, which has a large share of investment in Activision Blizzard. Anyways, what do you think about the latest turn in this fiasco? I've been the Schwantz27, out like the LA Dodgers. Until next time.